Today we're going to look at the nervous system. When we take a look at the nervous system, we want to start really general. Like, what is the nervous system? Well, it's a master controlling and communicating system of the body. It allows cells to communicate via electrical and chemical signals. Oftentimes, these electrical signals are called action potentials, and the chemical signals are neurotransmitters. Now, this type of communication is very rapid and specific, and it's usually going to cause almost an immediate response. We can actually compare and contrast the nervous system with another controlling and communicating system of the body called the endocrine system. The endocrine system uses hormones, wherein the nervous system is using electrical and chemical impulses and signals. So they do differ, and how quickly they can get a response differs as well. But we're going to focus mainly on the nervous system. The nervous system has three overlapping functions: sensory input, integration, and motor output. Sensory input requires a receptor to send a sensory signal towards the central nervous system, so the brain or spinal cord, for processing. That processing is called integration. That integration will create an output, or a decision will be made, and that output will be communicated to motor neurons, which will send out this output as a response to the stimulus to effector organs. The general effector organs are muscles and glands, because muscles can contract and glands can secrete. So they can have an effect, which is why they're called effector organs. They can produce a response. So that's what we're seeing in this image. Here in this image, we're seeing a blue sensory neuron communicating to a green interneuron and a red motor neuron. Here in this image, the sensory stimulus is an individual seeing either a commercial that shows someone drinking something or just seeing someone drink something, and they realize they're thirsty because that sensory input from their eye travels to their brain. The brain, specifically the brain and the spinal cord as a part of the central nervous system, are the body's integration system. So this is where that information that is the sensory stimulus is processed. In this case, that information would be processed in the hypothalamus, where your body's thirst center is located. It may realize that you're dehydrated, that you have a low amount of not only water, but other different types of ions in the body. So in order to cause an output, it may make you feel thirsty. And then you may move to an area to get a drink and move your arm to take a drink, and that motor output that's going to travel to your skeletal muscles is going to be carried by a motor neuron. Here we see it going to the biceps brachii, so in this image that person can take a drink. So that combined the three overlapping functions of sensory input, integration, and motor output. But we utilized both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system just consists of the brain and spinal cord. Everything else that is nervous system is in the peripheral nervous system. Now, what the central nervous system can do is integrate. It's the control center. It's able to interpret sensory input and even dictate the motor output. So it's kind of the go-between between the sensory and motor parts of the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is anything outside the central nervous system. So spinal nerves and cranial nerves that emanate from the spinal cord and brain respectively are going to be part of the peripheral nervous system. We also want to include things like receptors and effector organs as part of the peripheral nervous system to an extent. Here's a look at central versus the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, again, is just brain and spinal cord. Everything else that is nervous system is the peripheral nervous system. And we can actually further break down the peripheral nervous system into two functional divisions. The sensory or afferent division, where somatic sensory fibers or visceral sensory fibers send impulses to the central nervous system. Somatic sensory fibers actually send impulses from the skin, skeletal muscles, the joints. So these are areas that let you know where your body is in space. And that's why they're called somatic sensory fibers, because soma means body. So these somatic sensory fibers let you know about where your body is. It would send information about stretch and vibration and contraction and pressure. But there's also visceral sensory fibers that convey impulses from visceral organs to the central nervous system. Again, they're called visceral sensory fibers because they convey information from organs, generally called viscera. Now that's the sensory or afferent division. Afferent signals are always sensory, and they always arrive or go to the central nervous system. But there is also the motor or efferent division of the peripheral nervous system. So this is going to go in the opposite direction. These signals will exit or leave the central nervous system and instead go to effector organs like muscles and glands. There's two different parts of the motor or efferent division. You have the somatic nervous system, also known as the voluntary nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system, also known as the involuntary nervous system. Conveniently, the somatic nervous system, which is going to control skeletal muscles that move your body, uses soma, which means body. And skeletal muscle is the only muscle that is controlled voluntarily. The autonomic nervous system sounds like automatic, which we have no control over. And the types of muscle, like cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, that contract involuntarily are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Glands are also controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So here's our overview for the levels of organization in the nervous system. So central nervous system is just brain and spinal cord. It's our integrative and control center for the nervous system. But a lot of information is going to be carried by the peripheral nervous system, both sensory and motor information. When it comes to that motor information that's going out to the effector organs like muscles and glands, it could be going to skeletal muscle. That would be information being carried by motor neurons of the somatic nervous system. Or it might be going to cardiac muscle or smooth muscle or glands. That would be a motor output signal being carried by motor neurons of the autonomic nervous system. And even the autonomic nervous system can be broken into two parts. The sympathetic and parasympathetic division, which are going to undo a lot of what each other does. For example, the sympathetic division likes to ramp up things like heart rate and slow down things like digestion. And the parasympathetic division does the opposite. Sympathetic division is sometimes thought of as hitting the gas pedal, whereas parasympathetic is sometimes thought of as hitting the brake. Now, it's not quite that simple, and we'll talk more about these in later chapters. But that's really it for this first part of the nervous system, but make sure you come back so we can look at the histology.